What happens when justice is nothing more than a game of manipulation? When those in power believe they can bend the truth to fit their own narrative. A black woman is dragged into court, accused of a crime she swears she didn't commit. The evidence against her is damning, the prosecution confident. The police officers who arrested her smirk, certain of their victory. But when a seemingly incompetent young lawyer steps forward with a shocking revelation, the entire courtroom is forced to confront a truth far more dangerous than they ever expected. The heavy doors of Jackson County Courthouse swung open, and Denise Walker was led inside, her wrists restrained by cold steel handcuffs. The two white officers escorting her, Sergeant Mitchell and Officer Carter, chuckled smugly, nudging each other as if they had already won. Mitchell leaned in close and muttered, just loud enough for Denise to hear, "Hope you enjoy prison, lady. You won't be scamming anyone from behind bars." Denise didn't react. She kept her head high, her eyes steady, despite the whispers that followed her through the crowded courtroom. From the prosecutor's table, Assistant District Attorney Richard Conway straightened his tie, then stood, his voice booming with confidence. "Your Honor, the prosecution has irrefutable evidence against the defendant." A murmur swept through the gallery. People leaned forward, eager to witness the downfall of yet another criminal. Conway gestured toward the screen at the front of the courtroom. A video began playing. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Denise, standing in a dark alley, accepting a large bag of cash from an unknown man. Gasps echoed across the room. A woman in the jury box shook her head. Caught red-handed, someone whispered. Denise heard it all, felt the judgment pressing down on her. Sergeant Mitchell turned to Judge Raymond Ellis, his voice firm. "We caught her in the act, Your Honor. No defense can change that." Judge Ellis adjusted his glasses and nodded before turning to Denise. "Ms. Walker," he said, his tone almost bored. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" For the first time, Denise smiled. "I don't need to say anything," she said smoothly. "My lawyer will speak for me." A brief silence followed. Then, the courtroom doors burst open. A young man, barely in his late 20s, stumbled inside, adjusting his crooked tie and clutching a massive stack of folders. He looked out of place, too inexperienced, too clumsy, too unprepared. The gallery erupted into laughter. The prosecutor smirked. "Ms. Walker," Conway said, "this is your lawyer?" Denise's smile didn't waver. "Yes," she said simply. "Meet Ethan Graves." Ethan tripped over his own feet, dropping a few papers as he hurried toward the defense table. He scrambled to gather them, his face flushing red. More laughter rippled through the room. One juror even rolled his eyes. "She's finished. Might as well plead guilty now." Even Judge Ellis let out a sigh, rubbing his temple. "Mr. Graves," he said, "I assume you're prepared to proceed?" Ethan finally stood up straight. And suddenly, his expression changed. Gone was the nervous energy. In its place was a sharp, calculating gaze. "Absolutely, Your Honor," he said, his voice calm, confident. He turned toward the screen where the damning video still played on loop. And then, he smirked. "This," Ethan said, pointing at the footage, "is the very proof that my client is innocent." The room burst into laughter again. Even Judge Ellis raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." Ethan turned to the jury, his voice steady, clear, commanding. "This video," he said, "is fake." Laughter died instantly. Sergeant Mitchell sat up straighter. ADA Conway's smirk faltered. And Denise? She just kept smiling. Because she already knew, the real game was about to begin. A stunned silence settled over the courtroom. For a moment, it seemed as if no one had heard Ethan Graves correctly. Then, laughter erupted again. "You've got to be kidding me," ADA Richard Conway scoffed. "That's your defense? That the video, the one we all just watched, is fake?" He turned to the jury, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen, I thought we were here for a serious trial, but apparently, we're in a comedy show." The jury chuckled, some exchanging knowing glances. Sergeant Mitchell leaned over to Officer Carter, whispering, "This is too easy." But Ethan didn't flinch. He waited. And then, he bunched his fingers together and snapped. The screen at the front of the courtroom flickered, and suddenly, the video changed. The grainy footage of Denise Walker accepting the money glitched. Then, a new video played, one that made the room fall into dead silence. It was the original, unaltered footage. This time, instead of showing Denise taking the money, The video revealed something entirely different. It showed Sergeant Mitchell and Officer Carter sitting in a dark room, editing the footage. Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Someone in the back dropped their pen. Sergeant Mitchell's face drained of all color. "This," Conway stammered, his usual smugness evaporating. "This has to be fake." Ethan turned toward the jury, ignoring Conway completely. "This is the original footage," he said smoothly. "The real one. The one that proves my client was framed." He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick file, marked with an official government seal. "And thanks to the city's security system," he continued, placing the file onto the table with a sharp thud, "we have proof that this video was tampered with." He turned back to the prosecution. "And let me guess, Mr. Conway, you never thought to verify the footage, did you?" Conway's face darkened. Ethan wasn't done. "You were so eager to put an innocent woman behind bars that you didn't even bother checking where your evidence came from." He took a measured step forward, eyes locked onto Conway. "Or maybe," Ethan added, "you already knew." A wave of tension crashed over the room. A single bead of sweat rolled down Conway's temple. Judge Ellis leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Graves, are you accusing the prosecution of misconduct?" Ethan turned, meeting the judge's gaze. "No, Your Honor," he said. He lifted the FBI-stamped file, flipping it open. "I'm accusing Sergeant Mitchell and Officer Carter." The entire courtroom erupted. Sergeant Mitchell shot out of his chair. "This is outrageous," he barked. "That footage is doctored. He's lying." Ethan didn't even blink. "If I'm lying," he said, "then why does the unedited version match the city's surveillance records?" He pointed toward the screen. "Why do the timestamps show gaps? Ones that just so happen to align perfectly with the moments the footage was altered?" Mitchell's jaw clenched. Ethan took a slow, deliberate step closer. "And why?" he continued. "Did my team find direct links between the edited video and your department's private servers?" Officer Carter let out a strangled noise, his face now shiny with sweat. Mitchell's hands twitched. Ethan smirked. "Gotcha." Judge Ellis lifted a hand, silencing the chaos. He turned to the prosecution. "Mr. Conway, given this new revelation, do you have a response?" Conway flipped through his files in a panic, his composure completely shattered. I need time to review this, Your Honor," he stammered. Judge Ellis nodded sharply. "Then we will adjourn for an hour to allow the prosecution to." Bang! The doors to the courtroom burst open. A team of FBI agents stormed inside, their badges gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. A commanding voice rang out. "Sergeant Mitchell, Officer Carter, put your hands where we can see them." Mitchell's face twisted in rage. "You can't do this," he snapped. "We're cops." The lead agent held up a warrant. "You were cops," he corrected. "As of this moment, you're under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit perjury." Officer Carter bolted toward the side exit. He didn't make it 3 steps before 2 agents tackled him to the ground. Mitchell stood frozen in place, his hands clenching into fists. Then, slowly, he raised them. The lead agent nodded, and 2 officers moved in, slapping handcuffs onto both men. "You have the right to remain silent," one of them recited. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Denise Walker, who had sat calmly through the entire trial, finally stood. She turned toward Ethan, and for the first time that day, she smiled. "You did good, kid," she murmured. Ethan grinned. Just another day at the office. The courtroom was still in shock. Conway sat stiffly at the prosecution's table, his mind clearly racing. Judge Ellis let out a slow breath, then turned to Ethan. "Mr. Graves," he said, "it appears your client is free to go." Ethan glanced at Denise. She gave him a knowing nod. Then, he turned back to the judge. "Then I believe we're done here, Your Honor." The judge banged his gavel. Case dismissed. Denise Walker was free, and as Sergeant Mitchell and Officer Carter were dragged away, Ethan couldn't help but think. This was just the beginning. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, signaling the end of the case. Denise Walker was free. Sergeant Mitchell and Officer Carter were let out in handcuffs, their faces pale, their arrogance shattered. The gallery was still in shock. People whispered among themselves, unable to process what they had just witnessed. A black woman, falsely accused, framed by officers who had sworn to protect the law, and a young, seemingly inexperienced lawyer who had just torn the entire case apart. Denise stood slowly, shaking off the tension that had clung to her since she was arrested. The weight of injustice was heavy, but not permanent. She turned to Ethan Graves. "You did good, kid," she said, her voice calm but filled with something deeper: gratitude, pride, relief. Ethan let out a breath he didn't even realize he had been holding. "Honestly," he admitted, running a hand through his messy hair, "I was making it up as I went." Denise chuckled. "Well, whatever you did, it worked." Before Ethan could respond, the prosecution table erupted. ADA Richard Conway slammed his briefcase shut, his jaw clenched in frustration. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, shooting Ethan a glare before turning sharply on his heel and storming out of the courtroom. Ethan watched him go, a small smirk forming. Oh, it was definitely over for him. The judge had already ruled. Denise was exonerated. The officers were arrested. But something in the way Conway walked out, furious but not panicked, made Ethan uneasy. He wasn't acting like a man who had just lost everything. Ethan glanced at Denise. She had noticed it too. "Something's not right," she murmured. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I don't like it." By the time they stepped outside, reporters were already swarming the entrance, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in their faces. "Ms. Walker, how does it feel to be free?" "Ethan Graves, how did you crack the case? Were you expecting this outcome?" Denise held her head high, her posture composed. She had fought too hard to let them see her as a victim. She turned toward the cameras, her voice clear, strong. "I want to thank my attorney, Ethan Graves, for fighting for me when no one else would," she said. "But today is about more than just my case." The crowd went silent, hanging on her every word. "This is about a system that allows innocent people to be framed," she continued. "A system that protects the guilty while punishing those without power." She looked straight into the cameras. "And if they thought I was going to stay quiet?" She smiled. "They thought wrong." Reporters erupted with more questions, but before she could answer, two men in suits stepped forward, flashing badges. "FBI. Ms. Walker, Mr. Graves," one of them said. "We need to speak with you. Now." Ethan exchanged a quick glance with Denise. Something wasn't over. Not yet. Inside an unmarked black SUV, the tension was thick. The two FBI agents, Agent Riley and Agent Maddox, sat across from Ethan and Denise, their faces unreadable. Ethan folded his arms. "I assume you're not here to congratulate us." Riley sighed. "We've been investigating corruption in the police department for months," he said. "Mitchell and Carter were small players in a much bigger game." Denise frowned. "How big?" Maddox pulled out a folder, flipping it open. "Judge Raymond Ellis. ADA Richard Conway. Police Chief Donovan." Ethan's stomach dropped. The judge? The prosecutor? The police chief? This wasn't just about two corrupt cops. This was about the entire system. Denise exhaled sharply. "They framed me to protect themselves." Maddox nodded. "And now that Mitchell and Carter are in custody, they're going to move fast to clean up loose ends." Ethan frowned. "Define clean up." Riley met his gaze. "We mean eliminating evidence," he said. "And if necessary." A pause. "Eliminating people." Denise and Ethan stiffened. Ethan leaned forward. "You're saying they might try to kill us?" Riley didn't blink. "Not might. Will." Ethan let out a sharp breath. "Fantastic." Denise folded her arms. "So what's your plan?" Maddox slid a burner phone across the table. "You two lay low. Don't contact anyone unless it's through this line. We're building a case, but we need time." Denise's expression hardened. "And in the meantime?" Riley sighed. "In the meantime, you stay alive." That night, Denise and Ethan sat in a cheap motel room, the only light coming from the flickering neon sign outside. Ethan stared at the burner phone on the table, tension coiling in his gut. "Lay low," he muttered. Easy for them to say. Denise sat across from him, sipping a glass of water. "You believe them?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, and that's the problem." Denise set her glass down. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to come after us." Ethan rubbed his face, exhaustion weighing on him. "Then what do you suggest?" Denise's eyes were sharp, calculating. "We go after them first." Ethan snorted. "Right. You, me, and what army?" Denise smiled. And then, she pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and held it to her ear. After 2 rings, someone picked up. A voice. Low, familiar, dangerous. "You still have a fight left in you, Walker?" Denise grinned. Always. She hung up and turned to Ethan. Now we have an army. Ethan stared at her. Then, with a tired sigh, he grabbed his jacket. Well, he muttered, I was getting bored anyway. And just like that, the real war began. Ethan Graves sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the burner phone as if it were a loaded gun. Denise Walker, meanwhile, was calm as ever, arms crossed, eyes sharp as she leaned against the rickety motel desk. You gonna tell me who you just called? Ethan asked, finally breaking the silence. Denise smirked. Let's just say, an old friend. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand through his messy hair. I swear, every time I think I know what's going on, I realize I don't know a damn thing. Denise chuckled. Welcome to the real world, counselor. A knock at the door made Ethan jump to his feet. Denise didn't move. She simply tilted her head toward the peephole. Relax, kid. That's them. Ethan wasn't convinced. Define them. Denise ignored him and opened the door. Two figures stepped inside, moving with quiet confidence. The first was a tall, broad-shouldered black man, his suit perfectly pressed despite the late hour. His presence commanded the room before he even spoke. The second was a woman in a dark leather jacket, her sharp eyes assessing everything the moment she walked in. A hand rested near her hip, where Ethan was pretty damn sure a gun was hidden. The man grinned slightly, nodding at Denise. It's been a while. Denise smirked. Too long, Marcus. Ethan blinked. Marcus? As in Marcus Boyd, the most well-connected private investigator in the state? And if Marcus Boyd was here, that meant the woman beside him was. Ethan turned toward her, his stomach twisting slightly. That's Vanessa King, isn't it? He asked. The woman gave him a once-over, unimpressed. So you're the lawyer who made all this noise? Ethan shrugged. Guilty as charged. Vanessa snorted. Let's hope you're as good as they say. Ethan turned to Denise. You called a PI and a fixer? Denise sat down, finally looking relaxed. We're going to war, Ethan. And you don't fight a war alone. Ethan sighed. Great. Love that for us. Marcus pulled out a tablet, setting it on the motel's rickety table. A series of documents appeared on the screen: financial transactions, internal police reports, closed-door judicial rulings. Everything you exposed in court was just the tip of the iceberg, Marcus said. Locking up Mitchell and Carter shook things up, but their bosses? They're still in play. Vanessa folded her arms. Judge Raymond Ellis. ADA Richard Conway. And let's not forget Police Chief Donovan. These guys don't just run the system. They own it. Denise nodded. And they were willing to frame me just to protect their empire. Ethan exhaled. So what's our move? We can't exactly march into the FBI and tell them we have a bad feeling. Marcus smirked. That's why we're not going to the FBI. Ethan frowned. Then where? Marcus zoomed in on a name at the bottom of the document. Ethan's stomach dropped. You're joking. Denise glanced at the screen and smiled. Oh, this is going to be fun. Ethan pointed at the name. You want us to go to him? Vanessa shrugged. He's our best shot. Ethan groaned. We're going to get shot. Denise patted his shoulder. Not if you keep that fancy lawyer talk ready. Ethan gave her a deadpan look. Denise, this man once put a senator in the hospital for double-crossing him. Marcus grinned. And that's exactly why we need him. Ethan leaned back, praying this wouldn't be his last night alive. Because their next move? They were going straight into the lion's den. Ethan Graves sat in the back seat of a black SUV, his stomach a knot of anxiety as the vehicle rumbled through the dark city streets. Beside him, Denise Walker looked calm, almost amused, while Marcus Boyd drove with his usual effortless confidence. Vanessa King sat in the passenger seat, her sharp gaze scanning every alley and rooftop, always expecting an ambush. Ethan, on the other hand, was barely holding it together. Let me get this straight, he said, rubbing his temples. We're going to meet the most dangerous fixer in the state, a guy who makes criminals disappear, and we're going to ask him for help? Denise smirked. Exactly. Ethan let out a low groan. I should have gone to med school. The SUV slowed as they approached an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city, tucked away behind a chain-link fence and a row of abandoned buildings. No streetlights. No cameras. The kind of place where people walked in but didn't walk out. Vanessa checked her gun. Last chance to back out, counselor. Ethan sighed. Let's just get this over with before I change my mind. Marcus pulled the SUV through the rusted gates, stopping in front of a large garage door. A single armed guard stood outside, his eyes cold and watchful. When he saw who had arrived, he pressed a button on his earpiece, then stepped aside as the garage door rattled open. "Boss is waiting," the guard said. Ethan swallowed hard. This was a terrible idea. The inside of the warehouse was unexpectedly pristine, a sleek office space built into the old structure. A long mahogany desk sat at the center, lined with high-end monitors displaying security feeds, financial data, and police reports. And behind the desk sat Victor Castillo. He was older, in his late 50s, but still as sharp and dangerous as ever. Salt and pepper hair, a crisp charcoal suit, and the kind of eyes that could see straight through a man's soul. Castillo had built his empire by making problems disappear, sometimes legally, sometimes not. And now, they were his next problem. Denise stepped forward first. "Victor, it's been a while." Castillo smiled, slow and knowing. "Denise Walker. Thought you'd be rotting in prison by now." Denise smirked. "Guess the system isn't as airtight as your friends thought." Castillo's eyes flickered with amusement. "Seems not." He turned his gaze toward Ethan. "And you," Castillo murmured. "The lawyer who humiliated half the justice system on live television." Ethan forced a weak smile. "It's a gift." Castillo chuckled, then leaned forward. "So tell me, why are you here?" Vanessa stepped in. "We need information, and we know you have it." Castillo raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly makes you think I'd help you?" Marcus answered this time. "Because the same people who tried to bury Denise, they're coming for you next." For the first time, Castillo's smile faded. Ethan saw it, the way his fingers tensed slightly, the way his jaw tightened just a fraction. Denise leaned in. "You don't think they'll turn on you? The second they feel exposed, they'll start cutting loose ends. And guess what, Victor? You're a loose end." Castillo was silent. Then, he sighed, shaking his head. "I knew Judge Ellis was greedy. I didn't think he was stupid." He reached into his desk, pulled out a USB drive, and slid it across the table. "Everything you need," he said. "Bank transfers, off-the-record meetings, judges, prosecutors, cops. All of them." Ethan stared at the drive, hardly believing it could be that easy. "What's the catch?" he asked. Castillo smiled. "Smart boy." He leaned back. "The catch is, once you have this." He gestured to the USB. "You don't stop." Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "Meaning?" Castillo exhaled. "You take down Ellis, Conway, and Donovan, but that won't be enough," he said. "Because the system, it rebuilds. Someone else will take their place." He steepled his fingers. "So you either burn the whole thing down." His eyes locked onto Ethan's. "Or you become a part of it." Silence. Ethan's stomach twisted. Burn it all down? That was too big. Too much. But if they only took out the ones at the top, who was to say it wouldn't start all over again? Denise took the USB, tucking it into her pocket. "We'll handle it." Castillo smirked. "I look forward to watching." As they turned to leave, Castillo's voice rang out one last time. "Oh, and Denise?" She paused. Castillo smiled. "Be careful. People like us." His eyes darkened. "We don't get happy endings." Ethan clenched his fists. Maybe not. But he'd be damned if he let the system win again. They had work to do. The black SUV cut through the quiet city streets, the weight of Victor Castillo's warning lingering in the air. "We don't get happy endings." Ethan Graves sat in the back seat, staring at the USB drive Denise held between her fingers. Inside this tiny piece of plastic and metal was proof, undeniable evidence of corruption that reached the highest levels of the city's justice system. Judge Raymond Ellis, ADA Richard Conway, Police Chief Donovan, and probably more. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temples. "We're sitting on a nuclear bomb." Marcus Boyd, gripping the wheel, nodded grimly. "Which means the second they realize we have this, we become their #1 targets." Vanessa King, sitting in the passenger seat, smirked. "Let him try." She checked the magazine in her gun, then slid it back into place with a quiet click. Ethan shot her a look. "Do you ever not think about shooting people?" Vanessa shrugged. "Nope." Denise, still turning the USB between her fingers, finally spoke. "We need to be smart. If we release everything at once, they'll bury it before the public even has a chance to see it." Ethan nodded. "So we hit them one by one." Denise smiled. "Exactly." Marcus frowned. "Who's first?" Denise didn't hesitate. ADA Richard Conway. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Ethan grinned. "Good. I never liked that guy anyway." Hours later, Ethan sat inside a dimly lit cafe, the USB drive plugged into his laptop. Across from him, Denise scrolled through encrypted files on her phone. Vanessa and Marcus were nearby, watching from different corners of the cafe, ready for anything. Got him, Denise murmured, eyes flicking across her screen. She turned the phone toward Ethan. It was a list of private transactions, all leading back to Richard Conway. Ethan whistled. Damn, the guy's been laundering money through fake shell companies for years. Denise smirked, and making sure all the right cases got dismissed. Ethan leaned back. So how do we use this? Denise's smile widened. We make him panic. She pulled up Conway's personal email, typed out a short, cryptic message. Then, she hit send. Ethan read it over her shoulder. We know what you did. And now? So does everyone else. A link to the financial documents was attached. Ethan exhaled. He's gonna lose his damn mind. Denise grinned. That's the plan. It didn't take long. Just 30 minutes later, Richard Conway stormed into his private office, slamming the door shut. His hands trembled as he opened his laptop, his face ghost white as he reread the email. The files were real. The numbers, the bank accounts, all of it traced directly back to him. How the hell did they get this? He muttered, pacing the room. A knock at the door. He jumped. What? The door cracked open. Judge Ellis stepped inside. His expression was cold, unreadable. Conway swallowed hard. They know, he whispered. They have everything. Ellis didn't react. Who? I don't know. Conway ran a shaking hand through his hair. The email was anonymous, but whoever sent it. They're not bluffing. Ellis exhaled through his nose. Then, in a tone devoid of sympathy, he said, Then we have a problem. Conway looked up at him, desperation in his eyes. You have to help me, Raymond, he begged. You have connections. Ellis sighed. Then, he reached into his jacket pocket. Conway's eyes flickered with relief, until he saw what Ellis pulled out. A silencer. Wait. Bang. The sound was barely more than a whisper, but the result was the same. Richard Conway collapsed against his desk, a small hole right between his eyes. His blood splattered across his computer screen, right over the emails detailing his corruption. Judge Ellis calmly wiped his hands with a handkerchief, then turned to his phone and dialed a number. They made their first move, he said smoothly. It's time we make ours. And then, he walked out, leaving Conway's corpse behind. The next morning, Ethan's phone buzzed violently. A news alert. Denise leaned over his shoulder, reading the headline. District Attorney Richard Conway found dead in his office, suspected suicide. Ethan sat back, shaking his head. That wasn't suicide, he muttered. Denise's jaw tightened. No, it was a cleanup. Marcus exhaled. Ellis knows we're coming for him. Vanessa cracked her knuckles. Good. Ethan glanced at Denise. You still want to go through with this? Denise's eyes burned with determination. They just prove they're willing to kill to protect their power, she said. She looked at the USB drive, then back at Ethan. So now? We burn the whole thing down. Ethan grinned. Let's do it. The news of Richard Conway's death spread like wildfire. The official story? Suicide. The reality? A hit job. Ethan Graves stared at the newspaper headline, the words feeling almost surreal. Corrupt district attorney found dead. Authorities suspect suicide. He scoffed, tossing the paper onto the motel table. They didn't even try to make it look real. Denise Walker sat across from him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. They don't need to, she muttered. They sent the message loud and clear. Vanessa King leaned against the motel wall, sharpening a knife absent-mindedly. Yeah, the message is shut up or die. Marcus Boyd, standing by the window, checking for tails, sighed. Guess we're not shutting up, huh? Ethan chuckled. Nope. Denise leaned forward. We made our move. They made theirs. Now, it's time to hit back. Ethan rubbed his temples. You have a plan, right? Denise's grin was sharp, dangerous. Oh, I have something better than a plan. She pulled out her phone, tapping a few times before sliding it toward Ethan. The screen displayed a heavily encrypted email. To all major news outlets. Subject, the truth about Judge Ellis. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, are you seriously about to leak everything? Denise smirked. Not yet. Marcus folded his arms. Then what's this? Denise tapped the screen. This? This is leverage. Ethan leaned in, reading the email carefully. You're not sending it. Denise shook her head. Not yet, but if something happens to any of us. She clicked a final command, an automatic release trigger. This email goes out to every journalist in the country. A heavy silence filled the room. Vanessa let out a low whistle. Damn, now that's insurance. Marcus nodded approvingly. Smart. Ethan exhaled. So now what? Denise's smile darkened. Now we put the pressure on Judge Ellis. Ethan frowned. How? Denise leaned back. We're going to make him panic. Judge Raymond Ellis sat at his polished mahogany desk, fingers steepled, eyes locked on the news article about Conway's death. The kill order had been necessary. Conway was a weak link, and weak links got people killed. But even with him gone, the problem wasn't over. Because whoever had leaked the financial records, they weren't done. A knock at his office door made him glance up. Come in. The door opened, and Police Chief Donovan stepped inside, his face tight with frustration. We have a problem, Donovan said. Ellis sighed. You mean another problem? Donovan dropped a folder onto the desk. Ellis opened it, his breath hitching for the first time. Inside was a printed email. The one Denise had written. The one that hadn't been sent yet. Where did you get this? Ellis asked, voice low, dangerous. Donovan sat down, his jaw clenched. One of my guys intercepted it before it could be sent. But if this email gets out... Ellis slammed the folder shut. Then we're all finished. A long silence stretched between them. Then, Ellis's expression hardened. Find them, he said. Find them, and end this. Donovan hesitated. Are you sure? Ellis's eyes darkened. You hesitated last time. And now Conway is dead. He leaned forward. Do I need to start questioning your loyalty too? Donovan stiffened. No, sir. Ellis smirked. Then handle it. Ethan and Marcus sat inside a black sedan, parked in a quiet lot across from the courthouse. Their job? Watch and wait. Vanessa was nearby, keeping an eye on Chief Donovan's movements. Denise, however, was about to walk into the lion's den. She stepped out of the car, adjusting the strap of her bag, and made her way toward the courthouse entrance. Ethan exhaled. I still think this is a bad idea. Marcus chuckled. Kid, this whole thing is a bad idea. Ethan muttered. That doesn't make me feel better. Denise walked straight through security, past reporters who were too distracted by Conway's death to notice her. And then, she stepped into Judge Ellis's private chambers. Ellis looked up from his desk, his surprise quickly masked by a smirk. Ms. Walker, he said smoothly. I wasn't expecting you. Denise dropped a thick envelope onto his desk. Thought you might want to see this. Ellis slowly opened the envelope. Inside, a single photograph. A picture of him and Police Chief Donovan, shaking hands at a private fundraiser. Ellis's smirk faded. Denise crossed her arms. Let me guess, she said. You were just talking about golf? Ellis set the photo down carefully. What do you want? Denise smiled. I want you to understand something, she said. You tried to bury me. You tried to kill this case. But guess what, Judge? She leaned in. You failed. Ellis's eyes flickered with something dangerous. You're playing a very reckless game, Ms. Walker. Denise shrugged. Yeah, well, I like to win. She turned toward the door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing, she added. Ellis arched an eyebrow. You have 24 hours to resign, Denise said, or the next email goes out. A beat of silence. Then, she walked out, leaving him to sweat. As she stepped outside, Vanessa's voice came through the earpiece. You think he'll fold? Denise smirked. He's a coward. He'll fold. But as she reached the car, Marcus suddenly cursed. Walker, get down. Before she could react, gunfire exploded from across the street. Ethan tackled Denise to the ground as bullets ripped through the air. Vanessa returned fire, shouting into the radio. Move. Move. Marcus threw the car into reverse as masked gunmen stormed out of an alley. Denise's breath came fast and hard. They had made their move. Now, the war was truly on. Gunfire tore through the air, shattering car windows and sending sparks flying off the pavement. Denise Walker hit the ground hard. Ethan Graves on top of her, shielding her from the onslaught. Stay down, he shouted over the chaos. Vanessa King moved fast, rolling behind a parked car, her gun already drawn. She fired 2 clean shots, forcing the masked gunman to duck behind cover. Marcus Boyd, gripping the wheel of the black sedan, slammed on the gas, sending the car skidding sideways. Get in, he barked. Denise and Ethan scrambled to their feet, sprinting toward the open car door. Another hail of bullets rained down, narrowly missing them. Vanessa covered them, firing precisely, each shot measured and deadly. Ethan dove into the back seat first, pulling Denise in with him just as Marcus gunned the engine. Vanessa waited until the last second, then vaulted over the hood, landing hard in the passenger seat. The moment her door slammed shut, Marcus peeled out, tires screeching. A bullet ripped through the back window, shattering glass over Ethan's lap. Jesus! Ethan yelped, brushing shards off his jacket. Denise twisted around, eyes scanning the masked gunmen fading into the distance. Who the hell were they? She demanded. Marcus gritted his teeth. Hired muscle. Not street guys. These were professionals. Vanessa reloaded her gun, eyes cold and calculating. They weren't here to scare us, she said. They were here to kill us. A heavy silence settled over the car. Ethan rubbed his temple, which means Judge Ellis didn't take the deal. Denise exhaled sharply. No. He doubled down. And now? The war was officially out in the open. They drove in silence for 10 minutes, making sure they weren't being followed. Finally, Marcus pulled into an underground parking garage, killing the engine. Denise was the first out, pacing as the weight of the ambush settled in her chest. Vanessa leaned against the car, shaking her head. They were waiting for us. Someone tipped them off. Ethan frowned. But who? Then he froze. Everyone noticed. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. Spit it out, Graves. Ethan's mind raced. The only other person who knew we were meeting Ellis was Chief Donovan. Denise's stomach dropped. You think the police chief set us up? Marcus asked. Denise closed her eyes, thinking. Then, she exhaled. No, she muttered. I think Ellis just played his trump card. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Denise looked up. Donovan was on the fence. Probably wasn't sure who to back. She clenched her jaw. But now, after tonight, he's picked his side. A heavy silence followed. Vanessa rolled her shoulders. So what do we do? Denise's eyes burned with determination. We take the fight to him. 3 hours later, they stood outside police headquarters. Ethan adjusted his collar nervously. I still think this is a bad idea. Marcus smirked. You always think it's a bad idea. That's because it usually is. Ethan shot back. Vanessa ignored them, checking her gear. Relax, counselor. We're not going through the front door. She nodded toward Marcus. You ready? Marcus grinned, holding up a stolen police keycard. Ready. Denise nodded. Let's move. They slipped in through a side entrance, walking with calm confidence. Act like you belong, Marcus muttered. Ethan tried, but it was hard not to sweat when they were sneaking into the office of the most powerful cop in the city. They reached the records department, a dimly lit office filled with rows of filing cabinets and computer servers. Denise moved fast, plugging a second USB drive into the terminal. Ethan kept watch, heart hammering. How much time do we have? He asked. Marcus checked his watch. Maybe 5 minutes before someone notices the breach. Denise typed furiously, eyes scanning files. Then, she froze. What is it? Vanessa asked. Denise's hands trembled slightly. Then, she turned the screen. Ethan's stomach dropped, because on the screen was a list of names. People that Donovan had ordered hits on. And at the bottom, Denise Walker, Ethan Graves, Marcus Boyd, Vanessa King. Ethan felt his blood turn to ice. Denise exhaled sharply. We were never supposed to make it out of that ambush. Marcus clenched his fists. And if we don't stop this, we won't make it out of the next one. Ethan swallowed hard. So what now? Denise stared at the screen for a moment. Then, slowly, she smirked. We finished what we started. She pulled out her phone and sent the email. Judge Ellis. Police Chief Donovan. The entire corrupt machine? Exposed. Vanessa let out a low whistle. No going back now. Denise unplugged the USB, pocketing it. Nope. Then, the alarms blared. Shit. Marcus hissed. Time to go. They bolted for the exit, but as they turned the corner, they ran right into a squad of armed cops. Guns were drawn. Freeze. Ethan raised his hands, his heart slamming in his chest. Denise stayed perfectly still. And then, Chief Donovan stepped forward. A slow, smug smile spread across his face. Well, he murmured. You just made the biggest mistake of your lives. Denise gritted her teeth. Funny, she muttered. I was just about to say the same thing. The cops moved in. And just like that, they were caught. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Denise Walker's wrists as 2 uniformed officers shoved her forward. Beside her, Ethan Graves, Marcus Boyd, and Vanessa King were also restrained, their hands behind their backs, faces grim. Police Chief Donovan stood in front of them, his smirk full of triumph. You really thought you could outplay me? He mused, shaking his head. After all these years, Denise, I expected you to be smarter than this. Denise didn't blink. You sure you want to start celebrating, Donovan? Donovan chuckled. Why not? You just broke into my department, hacked my files, and sent out classified information. There's no jury in the world that won't lock you up for that. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Right, because a corrupt cop like you cares about what's legal. Donovan smirked. I don't. But the headlines will be clean. Fugitive Denise Walker arrested for conspiracy against the city. You'll go down as the criminal, not me. Vanessa rolled her eyes. You really love hearing yourself talk, huh? Donovan ignored her, turning to the officers. Get them out of here. Put them in holding until I. Then it happened. A loud buzzing sound erupted from his desk, followed by a ping from every officer's phone in the room. A deep frown creased Donovan's face. He pulled out his phone, unlocking it. His smirk vanished. So did the color in his face. Denise smiled. What's wrong, Donovan? She asked. Bad news. Because there it was. The email Denise had scheduled, the one containing every dirty secret they had uncovered, had just been sent out. To journalists. To government officials. To independent watchdog groups. To the entire damn city. Marcus grinned. Told you. Shouldn't have celebrated early. Donovan's hands tightened into fists, his body trembling with rage. You think this changes anything? He snapped. You think some leaked files can take us down? Denise raised an eyebrow. Us? Donovan stiffened. She took a slow step forward, despite the handcuffs. See, Donovan, that's the thing about people like you, she said, her voice dangerously calm. You talk tough, but the second things get ugly, you start looking for someone to throw under the bus. Vanessa grinned. And right now? Looks like you just admitted you're part of something bigger. The cops standing around them shifted uneasily. Donovan's eyes flickered toward them, realizing his mistake. Shut up, he snapped. But it was too late. One of the officers frowned. Chief, what's she talking about? Another officer, staring at his phone, muttered, Jesus. Because they weren't just looking at financial records anymore. They were looking at evidence of police misconduct, cover-ups, unsolved murders tied directly to Donovan's department. And at the bottom of one document, a wire transfer from a private account, made out to Judge Raymond Ellis. Silence. Then, Ethan spoke, his voice calm, deliberate. Looks like you're not just going down for corruption, Chief. You're going down for murder. Donovan's breathing grew erratic. Then, in a blur of motion, he lunged for his gun. Bang! A single gunshot rang out. The room froze. Donovan staggered back, gripping his shoulder, his gun clattering to the floor. One of his own officers had just shot him. The officer, his badge reading Sergeant Raines, kept his weapon raised, his face pale but determined. You were really about to kill them, weren't you? Raines said. Donovan's face twisted in fury. You just ended your career. No. Chief, you did that yourself. Sergeant Raines turned to his fellow officers. How many times have we been ordered to ignore things? How many times have we been told to look the other way? Several officers shifted, exchanging uneasy glances. One of them finally muttered, too many. Then, another stepped forward. Then another. And another. Until the entire room turned against Donovan. Denise smiled. Checkmate. Within hours, the entire department exploded in chaos. Police Chief Donovan was arrested on site, charged with conspiracy, corruption, and attempted murder. Judge Raymond Ellis? FBI agents raided his mansion at dawn, pulling him out in handcuffs as cameras flashed. As for the rest, officials scrambled to distance themselves, but the damage was done. The system had cracked open. And Denise Walker? She walked out of the police station a free woman. Ethan, standing beside her, let out a breath. Well, he muttered, that was one hell of a week. Denise chuckled. And we're still alive. That's a bonus. Marcus smirked. Barely. Vanessa stretched. So what's next? Denise glanced at the reporters waiting outside, at the city she had just helped change. Then, she smiled. Now, she said, we rebuild. Denise Walker stood at the steps of City Hall, the cold morning air crisp against her skin. A crowd of reporters and citizens had gathered, their eyes locked onto her as she prepared to speak. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved toward her. The city had just witnessed the fall of its most powerful figures, Judge Raymond Ellis, Police Chief Donovan, and an entire network of corruption that had plagued the justice system for years. And now? They wanted to hear from the woman who had taken them down. Denise took a breath. Then, she stepped forward. I spent the last few months fighting for my life, she said, her voice steady. Not just because I was falsely accused, not just because I was nearly murdered for speaking the truth, but because the system we trust to protect us was built to destroy people like me. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But today, she continued, that system lost. Applause broke out, small at first, then growing louder, stronger. Denise let them have their moment before raising a hand. The crowd fell silent. This isn't just about me, she said. This is about every innocent person who has been wrongfully accused. Every family that has been torn apart by corrupt officials. Every case that was buried to protect the powerful. She paused, letting her words settle. We can't undo the past, but we can damn well make sure this never happens again. The crowd erupted in cheers. Denise stepped back, letting the energy of the moment wash over her. Beside her, Ethan Graves grinned. Well, he murmured, looks like you just became the city's new hero. Denise smirked. I don't care about being a hero, Ethan. She turned her gaze toward the people in the crowd, citizens, families, victims of the same broken system she had fought against. I care about change. Hours later, Denise, Ethan, Marcus Boyd, and Vanessa King sat inside a private office downtown. A temporary safe house, at least until things settled. Marcus tossed a folder onto the table. So what do we do about this? Ethan picked it up, flipping through the pages. His stomach twisted. Inside were documents that had surfaced after Ellis's arrest. Evidence of another player. One they hadn't accounted for. A bigger power behind the corruption they had just dismantled. Vanessa leaned back, arms crossed. I knew it was too easy. Ethan exhaled. Who the hell is pulling the strings now? Denise took the folder, her jaw tightening as she read the name. Then, slowly, she slid the document across the table. Ethan looked down. His heart skipped a beat. The name read, Senator William Hawthorne, a powerful politician, one of the most influential lawmakers in the country. Marcus let out a low whistle. So, Ellis and Donovan weren't the top of the food chain after all. Vanessa cracked her knuckles. Typical. Cut off one head, another grows back. Ethan rubbed his temple. So what do we do? Denise stared at the name for a long moment. Then, she smirked. We finish what we started. Ethan groaned. You just can't enjoy a victory, can you? Denise grinned. Nope. Vanessa grinned. I like her. Marcus chuckled. Well, looks like we're not retiring anytime soon. Denise stood, looking out the window at the city below. They had won a battle. But the war? The war was just beginning. In a luxurious penthouse across town, a man in a three-piece suit sat behind a grand desk, swirling a glass of whiskey. Senator William Hawthorne. His phone buzzed. He picked it up, pressing it to his ear. Speak. A voice on the other end. Low. Dangerous. They know about you. Hawthorne took a slow sip of whiskey. Of course they do. A pause. Do we handle it? The voice asked. Hawthorne smirked. No. He leaned back, his cold blue eyes gleaming. Let them come.